need it. Now, we are welcome again. You're welcome to research method class. And in this class, I want to quickly focus. We have just about 10 or 15 minutes left. I want to focus on the various methods of data collection in our scientific research. The beginning point, of course, before you begin to talk of the method of research is to know the purpose of research. And these are some of the various purposes of research, as it were. And we have, for instance, fact finding. It could be that you just want to find out some facts about some, so you call that descriptive research. So you just want to describe some scenario, just a particular, maybe the culture of the Yorubas. You want to give it a description. So you can go into fact finding about what are the various dimensions of Yoruba culture or Igbo culture or Hausa culture. Are you getting it? And so that can form a kind of descriptive. That's a research in itself. So you go into a kind of what qualitative study and live among them and begin to ask some questions and begin to document their various producers, the way they marry, the way they grade, the way they, what kind of food they eat, and then you get facts and figures, and then you now give a description of that. That is research. That is, in fact, the basic form of research. It's not, because it's not only until you conduct experiment. Fact finding is a form of research, and that will now give you the kind of method you are going to use to collect your data. So the purpose will determine the type of method you are going to use to collect the information. That's why you need to understand your purpose clearly. Then the second type of purpose or research purpose is exploration. Looking at patterns. Mungo Park was and there was an example of that. It was Mungo Park exploration. It was trying to discover the root of River Niger. Of course, a pity he died in the process, but it was a kind of exploration. So you can come up with such exploration. You want to know the genesis of a particular thing. You want to know why a particular trend is occurring. You can go into exploration of that event, that kind of a thing. For instance, why is it that it seems to be in the, I don't know which area of Nigeria, you have more of kidnapping. You want to know what is the genesis of it and so on and so forth. You can go into exploration like that. Then there's what you call analysis, trying to explain the why or the how of events and things. That is another kind of research. We call it analysis. And then we also have predictive research, trying to forecast the likelihood of a particular event. And that's why you use regression analysis in most cases. You want to predict, for instance, we are trying to work on that presently in the university. We're going to see if we can predict students who are likely to end up with first class at our admission process. During the admission process, we want to come up with a model that can do an accurate prediction of students who are likely to do well and not give us trouble when they enter CU. So we can screen them out from that stage. So that kind of the model is a kind of predictive model, and it's a kind of research in itself. Then research is also at times focused on solving problems. You want to solve a problem, you want to improve on current situation, you want to solve some problems within the country. We have so many of them in Nigeria. So we can also come up with, that's another purpose of research. And the reason why I'm starting with this in the course of discussing methods of data collection is that it is this purpose that will give you an idea of the method you are going to use in data collection. That is the reason why you need to start with it. And so I've explained descriptive research already, so I don't need to go too much into, let me just skip this as it were, because to save time and then move on. I've also given you various examples in the course of my introductory statement just now, so I don't need to start repeating all this. Predictive, I've given you examples of all this. So let's just move on now. Then another thing is that you need to understand that the methods of collecting data collection, is part of your chapter 3. And there's a section under chapter 3 we call procedure for data collection, right? So you need to give detailed explanation of how you collected your data. And of course, your data collection begins with instrument development and validation of your instrument. Either you are adopting it, you are adapting it, or you are creating a new one. So whichever one, you have to make sure you need a good understanding of how to develop a valid instrument. Of course, and that is actually what I mean by the various methods. It begins from that point. To know the various methods of collecting your data, you need to, first of all, when you establish your purpose, it will now determine you the kind of instrument you will need to collect that data. And of course, there are two domains under that data collection procedure. It can be qualitative it can also be quantitative. Quantitative has to do with something that has to do collecting numbers, while qualitative are actually you use verbal, and most of your data, they're verbal, as it were. So we have those two methods, and I'm going to give you examples of these various methods of data collection, so which we now determine. So, and then is again to have a good idea. I don't know whether you've done it in any course, the quantitative and qualitative. These are possible questions. You can be asked to differentiate between qualitative and quantitative data or methods of research, and so these are some of the parameters of various domains of differentiation, as it were. Now, quantitative has to do with the process is deductive, and then quantitative is as much as possible they measure objective facts. So you can say they are more or less very objective, because you have concise figures to tell you whether the thing is present or absent. Then there's also a focus on variables in quantitative research, and then there's also a kind of firewalls between research process and research value, so to speak. And then it's also cross-contextual in the sense that you can be cross-sectional, you can be across many years. Like if you want to study get data on people from different ages, from ages 10 to 20, there's this cross-sectional data you can get. You can do that within the same period. We call it cross-sectional study, and that is you just pick 10-year-olds, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and of sizable quantity, like between 30 and upward, and then you get your data on each set. And that you have virtually conducted a study of almost 10-year span at the same time. That is possible when you are doing quantitative study. But when it comes to qualitative, that may not be. Okay, it's not that it's true, it's also impossible, quite all right. But when it comes to qualitative, you depend more on the context, than for quantitative, because in qualitative, you discover that even the situation, the scenario, the event of that time may determine the kind of behavior people are exhibiting. So when you are reporting, you put the context into your report. You factor in the context into your report. But for most quantitative studies, they hardly do that. That is the point we are trying to bring out here. And of course, quantitative study, you can your sample size is always possible to engage in a large sample size when you are engaging in quantitative studies. But when it comes to qualitative, because of the need to go in depth, interviewing them, asking them questions, you can cover a large crowd. It will be so laborious. In fact, it's almost humanly impossible. That's just a part of the limitations of qualitative studies. But you need to know these differences as we proceed. And there are more, of course. Quantitative, again, is using a lot of statistics, statistical analysis, then structured research process, and then it's specific, and then there's also separation from data, because you're just churning your data into the computer. But when it comes to qualitative analysis, you'll be poking and checking the trend within your data to come up with a theme, and that's the difference between qualitative and quantitative again. And when it comes to quantitative, it's very easy to generalize. But when it comes to qualitative, it is because it's contextual, you may not be able to generalize your finding, as it were. Those are part of the limitations of qualitative and qualitative studies as against quantitative study. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of qualitative data now, because we have not been talking too much about this. We've already talked a lot about questionnaire. Those are some of the methods we use there. And then some other tools we use for quantitative data collection. Who can tell me another kind of tool we use under quantitative, apart from questionnaire, for quantitative data? Some tools we use to generate quantitative data, because I'm going to be dwelling on qualitative data collection methods in this slide, in this presentation. But can somebody quickly mention, without wasting time, if you know some other techniques we use under quantitative to collect, apart from questionnaire?
Interview.
Interview, yeah. Interview is dual. Is both qualitative and quantitative, but you can also give us. You can translate the data you get there into numeric value. So, but there's something more that can give you clear quantitative data. Can you mention that? Checklist, yes, checklist is a one type. Yes, any other one again? I'm expecting you to mention tests, psychological tests, including academic achievement tests like even your semester test. They're all part of data collection instrument. Actually, when we conduct examination using those achievement tests, we are trying to check, we are actually conducting a kind of research to check your level of academic assimilation over the semester. It's a kind of research in itself. We are collecting data from you. We give you some prompts and questions. You now respond to those tests. We now analyze that and evaluate it and then give you a grade and judge you whether you have mastered that course or not. It's a research. Even the examination process you're about to start is a research process in itself. And test is a more popular one, in fact, more reliable than most questionnaire. Academic, and we have various forms of tests. Can you mention them? I've taught you that before. I don't know whether I've taught you. Okay, you would take it on in 400 level under psychological testing. We have aptitude tests, for instance. We have heard about that before. We have aptitude tests. We have achievement tests. And those under achievement test again, you have varieties of of achievement tests, and so on and so forth like that. You mentioned checklist. You mentioned inventory is another one. These are various forms of tools you can use to generate quantitative data. But today, I will not be dwelling too much on that. I've given you an example of questionnaire, which is, in fact, inventory and co can be incorporated into a questionnaire. That's why I will not be going that way this morning. I want to dwell on this one that is not too popular, which is the qualitative data collection methods. And I'm going to, there are much more than these three examples here, but I'm just going to dwell on these three. I hope even time will even permit me because we have started late. So let me start. So we're going to explore in these three areas: phenomenology, grounded theory, and then ethnographic qualitative approach. So let's quickly see now. Let's start with the phenomenology. From the word phenomenon, that's actually the root word for this. And it describes the meaning of the, lived experiences from the perspective of the participant. And that's actually, you want to understand the certain phenomenon, or events, in the perspective of the participant. So it requires you going to live with them for some time, and then you probe them with questions to get their personal perspective over certain events and situations, over a particular phenomenon. And it seeks to achieve deep understanding of them by rigorous or systematic examination. And of course, the purpose is to describe the essence of the lived experience. So that is how the people are experiencing it, personally. I don't know what, let me see an example we can give in this situation. I know, for instance, there was one time I traveled to visit the Julvu people in Adamawa state. I learned they still walk around naked. So it fascinated. I was fascinated. I want to understand why they could still be doing that in this present age. One of my missionary friends was there. And so at, what's the name of that city now? We had to travel quite a number of some kilometers into the mountains to be able to meet them. And of course, they were still using leaves to cover their private parts. And of course, the women are not even covering their breast at all. They walk around naked. That was in 1991. I don't know whether the things have changed now, but I was able to witness that. So you may want to investigate, why are they actually operating that kind of culture? So that's a phenomenon, for instance. And some of them were still eating blood, raw blood. They will cake it and allow it to dry, and it's a delicacy for them. I even witnessed a situation whereby they will make sure they will breed maggots deliberately and feed, and then match the maggot and feed on it. To them, it's a delicacy, it's a sauce. I'm sure some of you are cringing there now. See, they live on these kind of things. So you may want to now understand this phenomenon. Why are they operating that way? And that is the kind of thing, that this kind of qualitative study is all about. So, and then they believe in the phenomenologists believe in multiple realities constructed by individuals within the social context of their lives. And I think that actually is the bane or genesis or the pillar for explaining the phenomenology conceptual framework, so to speak. This last statement you are seeing here. Now, what are the core research questions under phenomenological method? So the key research questions, we have just about 10 minutes left. The key research questions, what's the meaning of one lived experience? The way you have experienced it, what's the meaning of your own life experience, as it were? What is the meaning? What meaning are you attaching to it? And you can take different segments of that lived of experience, so to speak, different segments of that experience, because life itself is so wide. So you may want to take a particular aspect. It could be feeding, it could be marriage, it could be, and then you want to see why are they operating or operating the kind of culture that they're operating. You want to understand their own personal experience, how actually they decide, they have made up their mind to live that particular way. So it's meaning, it's a search for meaning. It's a search for meaning, as it were. That's what phenomenological is all about, is search for meaning. So what are some of their data collection techniques? You see, somebody mentioned interview the other time. You can see it coming up now, here under qualitative study. That's what I mean. Interview, focus group discussion, and so on and so forth. You can use them both ways. Of course, it's easy to convert the responses to interview also into numbers, but it takes some good understanding of the technique so I don't mess it up. But majorly, most interviews, they give you qualitative data. I mean, most of these interview formats give you kind of qualitative data. That is actually the commonest. So in-depth interview is one way the phenomenologists get information or data. And then written description of experience in diaries and journals is another method. You know, every day as you interact with the people, you are keeping a journal, and when you are done, you now begin to see trend or pattern in the behavior under different contexts, under different situation, maybe in different days, maybe in different parts, different days of the month. You can begin to see different kind of behavior emanating, and that will now begin to give you a better understanding of the phenomenon. I hope you are getting this. So those are part of the techniques. Observation is another powerful tool. And there are tools to create along these areas. You have interview guideline, you have written description guideline, you have observation grid or guideline too, to guide you to make it a structured observation. It's not just haphazard observation, to make it properly scientific. So you develop some tools to guide your observation, to guide your interview, and so on and so forth. But these are some of the various tools you use to collect data on that. So don't forget, we are discussing some data collection techniques, and this is being treated under phenomenological qualitative study. And these are some of the techniques we use to collect data. Multiple interviews with same participant. You can also conduct multiple interviews with same participant to reflect the meaning of the lived experiences from the participant's perspective. You know, I think we have already talked about that. So, and how do you analyze data in under phenomenological method? One, you read and reread your transcript. Transcript means interview, you transcribe it. Thank God there are technology, so many kind of technology now. As I'm speaking, for instance, now you have technology that can be converting what I'm saying into text. So the same thing can be applied to, so when you do your recording, you can inject it into that software that will just transcribe it for you easily, you know, without much ado. So you now go over your transcript carefully. You make various recordings of various your interviews and discussion and interactions with the people, and you now go over it, and what you are looking for is a theme or pattern. You want to see a pattern, you want to see some connections to be able to interpret the phenomenon that you are studying, to be able to make sense and create a theory. The goal is to create a theory, and of course, this is also linked with grounded theory. So, because if you are, by the time you're trying to derive a theory, you are moving into grounded theory approach. But phenomenon is just to understand the meaning of the phenomenon. That's the goal of phenomenological study. It's just to understand the meaning. They may not adduce any theory to it, but by the time you are trying to generate a theory out of what you're observing, you are moving into grounded theory. And I need to quickly mention this because another one I'm going to discuss under qualitative study is grounded theory. I hope so you begin to see it's a thin line between them. There are connections between all these various methods of collecting data. Then you also look for similarities and differences in your data. You do comparative analysis to identify themes. That's what I was talking about, themes or common threads in your data. That's unconnected, try to see connections. And then you also reduce your data into smaller number of categories so you can arrive at a consistent description of the meaning of the lived experiences of the people. Those are some of the things. And then you share your description with participants for verification. And maybe two or three of you can approach it differently, and then you now come and compare your notes later on to be able to see the validity of your conclusion. That is those are some of the ways. Even though we are saying it's qualitative and it's not subjective, it's fairly subjective, but there are ways you can conduct that. Your answer will still be very objective. And in fact, the beauty of qualitative study is that you get more in-depth information about events and phenomena compared with qualitative studies that is everywhere so much dependent on statistics. And in the process of depending so much on statistics, we lose so much information about what we are studying. And there are some things statistics cannot just capture. That's why we always recommend these days that we should combine, anytime we are conducting study, we should combine both qualitative and quantitative data collection methods and analysis, and to make our studies to be more robust. I'm sure you agree with this point, because there are so many things statistics definitely cannot capture. That's why we recommend that you combine the two, as it were. We have just about 3 minutes left. Is anybody having any question? Else I will continue, or anything you want to ask me. Can I pause just 1 minute to see if anybody have any point of clarification? You want me to clarify a point in some of the things I've said so far? Can you quickly chip it in, because we have just about 3 minutes left. Now, I want you to also take this unique difference about some of these qualitative approaches, especially this one I'm discussing, the phenomenology approach of data collection. Literature review is done after data collection, not like the typical quantitative method where you conduct your literature review before you start the study. For most qualitative study, especially the phenomenology, you conduct your literature, review after data collection, because you don't want to allow, the reason is that you don't want to allow the literature you are collecting to put you under a biased mode. Because eventually you'll be coming up with, you want to derive meaning from the data you are collecting. By the time you first of all conduct literature review, it could actually cloud your judgment. And that's why they prefer to delay literature review until after they finish collecting their data and try to tease out the themes. They now begin to look for literature to corroborate their finding. So it's reversed. This is a unique feature of most qualitative study, especially phenomenology. And I hope you are getting this. Then this method also places findings within the context of what is known about the phenomenon. So it's very, and then in terms of their finding, they report the essence of the experience. The essence of the experience, what is actually motivating or driving that experience. That's what they're trying to get at, the meaning behind. What is making them do what they are doing. That's the phenomenon, or that particular phenomenon. Readers should also get an understanding of what it's like to experience the phenomenon. So you try to live it yourself. That's why they kept on emphasizing the lived experiences. So that's why at times you use case study approaches. The ethnographic approaches, you combine it with this approach, because you literally have to go and live with them to experience those lived experiences, as it were. Okay, I think we are going to pause here, because I don't want to start, because if I start this, there's no way I can finish it within only 2 or 3 minutes left. So I still want to give you opportunity. Perhaps you still have some questions or contributions or observations on this. Maybe I should also use the remaining few minutes. If you want to talk, if I hear your sound of your voice, I will allow you to talk. But let me just take advantage